Welcome to the next part of my series titled Gacy, the man behind my nightmares. This part will be mainly told by police, family members, survivors, media outlets, and myself. I think it's important for people to hear some things from other people who were involved, so that is what this segment will cover. Some things may be hard to hear, but please keep in mind you are hearing it straight out of their own mouths. The emotions are real and justifiable. I know the previous videos have been solely me talking, but this one will be them. Because no matter how hard I might try, I can't say it like they can.
I was molested when I was a boy. It's hard to think back on and admit it ever happened. It takes away from your how you look at yourself as a male. And that was part of the reason I never told anybody for all those decades. When I was 9 or 10 years old, in 1956, my mother and I went up to a resort in Elkhorn, Wisconsin. A fellow named John, he was about 16. He worked there. He did odd jobs. I didn't have any buddies up there to spend time with, and so he befriended me. He had some time off, and he wanted to know if I want to go in a boat with him. So he took me out in a boat. I'd never been in a rowboat before, so that was fun for a little 9 or 10-year-old boy. We tied up the boat. He took me in the thicket, and he did a terrible thing. He did a terrible thing. He took me by the shoulder and said, "Follow me," threatened to kill me if I didn't comply. And I turned around. He said, "Open your mouth." I opened my mouth, and that's what happened. Thank God it was over quickly. It was over quickly. Is a person born evil? Do they become evil? I don't have an answer for that.
I never claimed to be an angel, and I've openly admitted to everything that I've ever done.
The people that knew him would have thought that the Pope would be more capable of committing a crime.
I wanted to hang his ass. I wanted to rip his eyeballs out, tear his head off. That's what I wanted to do.
I just can't picture that his sexual appetite got so much out of control.
He was not only one of the craziest, but one of the scariest human beings because he functioned in normal society.
He is the most notorious serial murderer ever. No one can hold a candle to John Gacy.
I think that he is proud of what he has done. I think he's proud of the title that he's got of the largest mass murder in the history of the United States. It's sick, but I think that he's proud of it.
I think he took out his sexual fantasies on these boys. He accomplished his goal, and then he murdered them.
I castrate him for what he did to me and the others.
These people are talking about John Wayne Gacy. On the surface, the divorced stepfather of two seemed a solid citizen. He owned a successful construction business that he ran from his home in Cook County, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. He was active enough in politics to have had his picture taken with then First Lady Rosalind Carter. But the man who entertained neighborhood children would soon become known as the Killer Clown, a sexual psychopath who lured dozens of young male victims to his house before assaulting and then murdering them. Even with Gacy's handwritten map, it took the police weeks to recover all the bodies he had buried in the crawl space under his house. Gacy had been killing and burying his victims for at least 4 years. 11 of his victims have still not been identified. In 1981, the courthouse here in Cook County, Illinois, was the site of John Wayne Gacy's trial for mass murder. He was convicted and sentenced to death for torturing and then killing 33 young men and boys. 10 years later, he's still alive. But what infuriates the victims' relatives even more than that is Gacy's newfound fame.
Personally, I believe he's the worst animal who has existed during this century.
Terry Sullivan was the Cook County DA who prosecuted John Wayne Gacy. He says that since Gacy has been on death row, he's taken up drawing, then painting, and his ability to sell his artwork for thousands of dollars is like salt in the wounds of his victims' relatives.
Yeah, certainly his abilities to get his name out and his paintings out and all the rest of the things outside of the jail walls is something that just it adds another burden to the back of the victims' families that are out there right now.
2 years ago, Gacy's paintings were exhibited in Boston. The art show consisted of 20 of Gacy's paintings, and it was a complete sellout. As a result of his notoriety, Gacy has received a great deal of mail from people around the country. He corresponds with them on stationery bearing his own personalized letterhead. These letters and others have been compiled in a new book about Gacy and his pen pals. It has reportedly sold a substantial number of copies.
Why should John Wayne Gacy have anything? He should have nothing. All his rights should be taken from him for what he did. I do not feel that a person who has committed so many crimes and hurt so many people should have anything available to him. Nothing whatsoever.
Dolores Nieder's son, John, worked in construction after he got out of the Marines. His last job offer was obviously from Gacy. The police found his remains with the others under Gacy's house.
When you lose a child, it's like taking a little piece of your heart out. Now, Gacy has stolen something from me that I just can't forgive him. I can't forgive that man. Do you blame me? Do you think I have? How can you forgive somebody who ends a part of your life? I can't do it. I don't even think God would expect me to do that, to tell you the truth.
Do you want Gacy executed?
Yes, I do. I want Gacy to die.
The beginning of the end for Gacy began in December 1978 when an investigation into the disappearance of 15-year-old Rob Peast led police to Gacy's house.
We found numerous pieces of identification that belonged to other young male individuals, and it didn't take too long to see that there was a pattern here, that these identifications belonged to people who were missing throughout the Chicago metro area.
In 1978, Joe Kozenzak was the chief of detectives in the Des Plaines, Illinois Police Department. That was where Rob Peast lived before he disappeared. Joe says Gacy confessed to him in lurid detail.
John used to like to read the Bible, certain excerpts from the Bible, to his victims while they were dying, and was essentially not finished with the victims once they died because he was a necrophiliac.
Tell me, how did he lure his victims?
He primarily used the guise of being a police officer. John was into the police thing. He had a Chicago police star. He had a car. He'd buy a brand new car every year that would always be black.
On the way to his house, he was boasting that he was a police officer. And he showed me his gun. And his car, it looked like a police car, like an unmarked police car. It had a spotlight and everything.
This man, we'll call Jim, doesn't want his identity revealed. He met Gacy in a bar and was invited to his house to do some drugs. For some reason, he survived his ordeal and can now tell us what happened. Did he give you drugs?
Yeah. And he told me to try this other stuff, it's better. So I tried it, and a minute or so later, I passed out. I ended up in the bedroom. And he was messing me.
He was sexually assaulting you?
Yes. And I tried to push him off, and I couldn't.
You're probably one of the few that ever got away alive. How did you do it?
I don't know. Well, I told him I wanted to go back to my car. And he said, well, okay, I got to go to church anyway, so I'll give you a ride back. And he gave me a ride back, and he gave me a handful of speeders, and I got back in my car and went home.
Like nothing happened?
Yeah.
What was your reaction when Gacy was arrested?
I got lucky. I got lucky he didn't kill me.
but at least 33 others were not as lucky.
It's not fair. It's not fair. When are all his appeals over? When will his execution be carried out? That's what I want to know. Is it going to be in my lifetime or isn't it? And nobody can give me an answer.
This next part is from an interview with a man named Tony, who met Gacy in the early 70s. I think his story is very interesting because he talks about Gacy himself, but he also adds credence to what has been speculated for years after Gacy was caught. It also brings to light something most people did not catch on to. Tony talks about being in Tennessee and Kentucky. A few of Gacy's victims were from other states, including Tennessee. I don't believe Gacy only found his victims in Illinois. I believe that there are many more victims than what has been disclosed. Although I have no solid proof, it is very hard to believe that he would go on these sprees and then have big gaps in time of doing nothing. There were bodies under his home, bodies in the river, victims he let go. I also believe there are bodies at the apartment building on Miami Avenue in Chicago. I believe there are bodies in the lakes mentioned in this interview. Shortly before Gacy was finally executed, he made several statements alluding to more victims. Even in an interview for TV, he said no one will ever really know the total number of bodies. As hard as the details are to hear and understand as for what he did to the victims, I still think that families of missing children would rather know where their son is and be able to put them to rest instead of not knowing and living the rest of their lives worrying and wondering and always searching. In reality, it's a no-win situation.
My mother had 7 brothers and sisters. We were just an average family. My father went to the Korean War, came back, opened up a Ashland gas station. He had other opportunities in Texas. He was a good salesman and a good organizer, but he landed in right on the river there, Tennessee River. My mother was a waitress at the state park. We were the closest home to the state park, and the state park was my playground. So the nearest home was probably a mile from ours. But I had the playground.
Sounds like an idyllic childhood.
It was a lot of fun. I wish my children could grow up like that.
Mm-hmm. But you had a run-in with somebody, an infamous person.
I did. In 1970, at the state park, it was Ken Lake State Park, I had a run-in with John Wayne Gacy. And well, actually, I ran into him 3 years later, too.
But so the first time you met him you were how old?
I was about a month or a couple weeks from being 15.
Hmm. And what happened?
It was a typical hot August night. I was at the state park, and I'd been playing with some of the tourist kids. I'd ridden my bike across the golf course over to the park property. I was sitting in the lobby. He walks up to me, and he said, "Are you a local?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "What's there to do around here?" And he's dressed in a leisure suit, a black and brown leisure suit. I was in orange swim trunks with a towel around my neck. I said, "Do you like fishing? Do you like boating? It's a resort. It's outdoor paradise, hunting." He said, "No." And then I started to get up. He said, "What's there to do around here?" And I said, "Are you into hiking or sailing or camping?" And he said, "No." And then I started asking him questions. I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "I'm from Chicago. I'm visiting some people down here." And I said, "Where?" He said, "Jonathan Creek." Well, I knew that was about 4 hours by water, 4 hours by land. So I started to get up again, and he asked me the question again. So I went ahead and stood up, and I was starting to get annoyed. And I said, "Are you looking for liquor, or are you looking for women?" I said, "This is kind of a family-style resort." And as I started to walk off, he said, "Hey, would you like to have a beer with me?" And I said, "Sure." So we walked down to his room. It was the 6th room on the left. I knew most of the workers at the state park, but there was a new desk clerk named Ella working that night. And we had seen each other. I had the keys to some of the rooms where I could get a fresh towel if I needed it. Since my mother worked there, I was a fixture really on the property. So we go down to his room. He opens the door. It was the old-fashioned keys back then. I walk in. I take a couple steps. He walks in behind me, and he takes his hand and he grazes my behind, my butt. And I thought, that was a little weird. I thought maybe that was a mistake. I looked to the right, which was a typical hotel room, and the bathtub was completely filled to the top with ice. And there was 2 chairs, 2 beds. The TV was in between the chairs. I took a seat at the first chair. And then he goes to a cooler and brings back a beer. It was a Wiedemann in a red, white, and black can. He hands me the beer, and then he goes over and shuts the curtains. And we were on the first floor, and my bike was parked just right outside the window, probably 30, 40 feet away. And he's closed the curtains. He walks past me. This would have been the picture glass window here. This would have been the restroom. As he goes past me, he starts talking to me, just asking me questions and, what I did, what my parents did and things like that. And he locks the door. And now I'm starting to feel, well, that's a little weird too, because initially I thought we was going to have kind of a man-to-man conversation. I'd been around my dad had a sawdust clandestine gambling joint behind the gas station, and he'd let me hang out with all the men in there. He'd also, when I was 13, I got on my dad about not being able to mow yards because we didn't have any neighbors. And he said, I'll take you down to the lake where all the guides come in and let you clean fish. So he told me to go in and start talking to the guides about cleaning fish. And my pitch to them was, while you're getting your boat gassed up for tomorrow and your bait, everything ready for tomorrow, I can take care of this for you. And that was kind of my little side hustle when I was 13. But anyway, back to Gacy. He seemed to start getting agitated. So I was drinking my beer. On his next trip through, he asked me if I like sex books. And in my mind, I was thinking Playboy. And I'd only seen Playboy a few times on the back of the bus with one of my friends. He would take the Playboy from his older brother, and all of us would gather around on the back of a school bus in a rural road where we were all bumping heads trying to see the centerfold. And so he takes a suitcase out, sets it on the bed, opens it up. It's full of books. There's probably 50 or 60 magazines there. I reach over, start fanning through them, and I didn't see anything that I thought I would like. So he grabs a couple and just hands them to me. I sit back and I start thumbing through them. They're all boys. So at this time, when I'm going through the magazines, he's back in the restroom. I hear the faucet come on and off. Next time he comes out, he's got a towel wrapped around his neck. And at that time when he came out, he locks the deadbolt on the door. So now things start to, slow motion kicks in on me. I think this is not right. Something's wrong. I'm in a bad situation here. So I got the same feeling about a year before. Me and a fellow that was a friend of mine tried to swim across Kentucky Lake, which was almost a mile wide. We got halfway across and he starts to panic. I said, you got to roll over and start swimming on your back until we can get some help. And I started looking for a buoy, someplace for us to find something to float. Luckily, in a few minutes, the Border Patrol or the Lake Patrol came through and we were able to get out of there. But I had the same feeling. I was starting to panic a little bit. He comes back through and I said, hey, there's just boys in these books. And he says, I got something else you might like. So he goes to the other side of the bed, puts another suitcase up on the bed, opens it up. It's full of shackles and handcuffs and chains. And inside my mind, I'm thinking, this is bad. I got to get out of here. So I take my beer. It was about half full. I set it down to my left heel. And I said, the next time he goes to the bathroom, I'm going to take this cooler and I'm either going to throw it through the window or I'm going to move it where I can get away. So he goes in the bathroom again, and his demeanor, his eyes start to get a little squinty. He was changing. He was looking at me when he was sneering at me when he would walk by. And I'm a pretty big kid for 15, but I knew I didn't have enough. This was a powerfully built man. And so as soon as he goes in the bathroom and the faucet comes on, I grab the cooler, I take it over into the far corner, right by the window. And when he comes back out, after he had mentioned the chains and the shackles and all that stuff, I said, do you have any snacks? And while he's looking at me, I kicked my beer over. And he acted kind of disoriented for a second. He said, no, I don't have any snacks. And I said, can I have another beer? So he looks where the cooler was. He didn't see the cooler. And he starts looking for the cooler. Well, he walks past me and around both beds, and I hit the door. And I'm unlocking the chain, I'm unlocking the deadbolt, and I open the door, and just as I step out, he grabs me. And he grabs at me. He hits me a couple of times, but I just kept backpedaling because I didn't have on a shirt for him to grab. I didn't have any shoes. So I back on out of there, walk past the desk clerk, Ella, and I get on my bike. And I'm a little shaken, but I didn't know who he was. I just figured it was some weird guy. But I'd been around enough men with my father's backroom gambling establishment that I knew that was not normal. So I get home, I go across the golf course, the dews flying up off my bike hit me. It was wet. I had to cross the road and go up a hill. We lived up on a hill. I had a German Shepherd named Vaughn, and Vaughn started to bark like I was a stranger till I got about halfway up the hill. Then he knew it was me, so he started whimpering. My mom opens the door. She says, where you been? I was getting ready to come looking for you. And I said, Mom, you're not going to believe what happened to me. And so I told her the whole story. My mom smoked about 3 cigarettes a day, but she backed up against the kitchen counter and lit a cigarette, and I could tell she was real concerned. And I said, this weird guy tried to trap me in his room. At first, she was just taking it in, but then she got more nervous and more nervous. She worked there. She worked at the state park, and she was a desk clerk too. Now, she started as a waitress when she was young. So she said, well, I'll talk to your dad about it when he gets home. And we knew it'd be midnight before he got home. That's when all the gambling stopped. He ran the gambling from 1 in the morning, or from 1 in the afternoon to midnight, 1 in the morning. So fast forward 3 years, we still live by the park. That's still my playground. I'm working at the marina now. And I'd taken on a lot of responsibilities at the marina. I was in charge of the houseboat rentals and other things. I worked with a big Samoan guy. He was 6'4". His name was Pete. So me and Pete are setting out by the gas docks at the marina, and I went in the 5 in the morning to 1 in the afternoon shift, and I thought, well, I'm going to check the wind, see how calm the lake is. I'm going to walk to the front of the marina and see if it's white capping or if we can go water skiing when I get off. So I walk to the front of the marina, I turn the corner, and I bump into a guy. And my first reaction was, I said, excuse me. I step aside, he steps aside, and it was him. Now I'm almost 18 now. And I said, hey, do you remember me? And he said, no, I don't remember you. And I said, you're from Chicago. I said, you remember me? And he said, no, I don't. Well, I was kind of full of piss and vinegar at that age, so I kind of went chest to chest with him. I said, yes, you do. I'm not 14 anymore. I was almost 15. And about that time, my boss walks out, Mr. Wilhelm, and he says, everything okay? So we went our separate ways. Then I guess it's 78, December 78. I'm older now. I'm driving. A lot of the kids I went to school, high school and college with in that part of the country had moved to Nashville. I'd been in Nashville partying. We'd closed down some bars in Printer's Alley, which was a big section of Nashville, Tennessee. I was hungover. I was hungry. It was December 23rd, I believe. So I started home. I went by Rivergate Mall. I was going to get a present for my mom and dad, and I ended up getting them one of those boxes of cheese and salami and all that stuff. So I walked to have it wrapped. There was a bunch of ladies on the horseshoe tables out in the intersection of the mall wrapping gifts. I set the gift up on the table, and I sat down and I looked behind them. I see this row of newspapers. And I don't know if it was my brain kicked in before my eyes kicked in, but as I'm staring at these newspapers, I couldn't really see the headlines, but I could see this guy's face. And I started getting cold chills. So I got up, walked over there, and every step I was saying to myself, that's the guy. That's the guy that tried to trap me in the hotel room. That's the guy I ran into at the marina 4 years later. So I get home, and I was telling my mom, I didn't live at home then, but I stopped by the house to tell my mom the story. She said, well, I'm going to call the Chicago Police Department. I said, don't do that, Mom. I said, what's the use in it? Well, she did it anyway. So she called the Chicago Police Department. She didn't know that the Chicago Police Department didn't have they didn't really have the case. They had no jurisdiction. It was the Cook County Sheriff who had the jurisdiction. And this police officer said, he kind of blew my mom off. He said, ma'am, do you think we really need someone's help, a lady's help in Kentucky when we got all these bodies under this guy's house? So she said, well, I just wanted you to make a report. So he took her name, took my name, put the date on it. And we kind of forgot about it. Then in, I guess, 96 or 97, a detective from the Cook County Sheriff called me. He wanted me to tell him the story, so I did. He would just ask me questions, but he wouldn't really give me any feedback, so I told him the story. Then 2007, a reporter from the Chicago Tribune called me, and he had a lot of knowledge. He had more knowledge. Of course, he had the benefit of being after the fact, but he said, I want to talk to you about this encounter. So we talked about it. We talked for 45 minutes. And he said he believed, and I do too now, that Gacy cruised the Dells of Wisconsin, Lake Geneva, Lake of the Ozarks, and Kentucky Lake. And he said they have a lot of what they call drownings, but he don't believe they were drownings. He believed these young men were killed. So we kind of parted. He said he'd get back in touch with me, and he asked me if I wanted to talk to him again, to call him. I never did. This never really bothered me. It still don't bother me, but until I got to be 50, 55 years old, then I started thinking about it. And I probably told 20 people about it. And I was relaying it to my son, and he said, well, you should write it down. So I did. I wrote it down. I think the reason, though, that I got away from this guy was because my mom and dad just let me, I had unlimited freedom.
Gacy had everybody fooled. And we don't like that feeling.
I tell people that the scariest thing about John Gacy was that he was not a scary person at all.
Just a one-on-one or in a group setting, he would be the last person that you think would be a serial killer and as devious as he was.
growing up as a boy in Chicago, the case, facts, and circumstances of the Gacy serial killings stuck with you. But also that image of a clown. You know, a clown is someone that's supposed to make you laugh and make you happy, and that someone was able to bounce children on their knee while they were making balloons for them, and then later that day kill a young man is something that I think sticks with a lot of young men in the Chicago area.
For like my generation, the Gacy case was definitely the end of innocence. I mean, there was nobody who didn't know about the case. There wasn't anybody who wasn't horrified about it, and there wasn't anybody who now didn't have that fear that there was this person who would grab you and kill you and no one would know about it for years at a time. And so it definitely changed kids my age. It changed their outlook on life.
He would have huge parties at his residence where 200 people would come. They would go into the house to use the washroom, and there was maybe 15, 16, 17, 18 victims buried in his crawl space.
Everything happened within that house of horrors. Every murder took place within that house of horrors. He looked at his victims as taking out the trash. He had no feelings about them either way. He could talk to you about a child who was dying of cancer and cry like a baby about this child he didn't even know or never met. And then talk about another child who he murdered and have no feelings whatsoever.
The first time I met him was in the Des Plaines Police Department, where we were talking about, we were in his house, and he basically drew a diagram of where the bodies were located in his crawl space. When he came up with 24, 25, 26 bodies to myself, I was thinking, this guy's nuts, and we walked out of the room. However, he wasn't.
Well, he came to me, and he had me conned the first few times I met with him. He had me believing that the police were harassing him, that they were tailing him for no reason at all, and certainly very believable. And until I start finding out about his background in the state of Iowa and some other things that he had done and little lies that he had told, and I started to disbelieve a lot of the things he said. And then in my office that night, we had the drink, and Gacy was bugging me all the time, and I didn't believe a word he was saying anymore. And Robbie Peast was a good kid, and he was missing. And the police, who I knew, were saying this guy's a bad guy. Finally, I couldn't take it, and that's when I put Robbie Peast's picture in front of him. I said, John, this kid's a good kid. And he looked at him and he said, that boy's dead, but he's not the boy that was in the drugstore. My heart, started pounding out of my chest. I said, what are you talking about? And then when he looked at me, he said, I've been the judge, jury, and executioner of many, many people. Now I want to be my own judge, jury, and executioner. I said, what are you talking about? And then I didn't say anything for the next few hours. He just went on and on and on. And even now to this day, I could feel that feeling. It was just the longest night and day of my life.
Some of these unidentified victims don't have anybody to report them missing. It's weird for most of us to think that someone doesn't have anybody, because most of us do. Most of us have family and friends, and that if we went missing, that someone would eventually pick up the phone.
Missing persons, which is really at the hub of these type of killers, were so easy to fade off into the woodwork, and no one knew about them. And it wasn't because their families didn't love them. Families loved them. They did what they thought they could, but law enforcement was woefully inadequate at that point in time to do anything about it. And I don't think people appreciate that.
It's interesting for us now to see the advances in technology that he's been able to utilize to make further identifications. One thing that was interesting to myself and some of the guys that worked the cases is that some of the boys that have now been identified, we knew about them back then, but we couldn't make a positive identification because we didn't have the forensic means to do it.
What we've learned through reopening the case and through identifying two of his previously unidentified victims, Bill Bundy and Jimmy Hawkins, both families didn't have dental records. And back during the original murder investigation, That was the primary way to identify a skeleton or a markedly decomposed body, was through dental records. Our predecessors didn't have DNA technology. So that means if a family like Jimmy's or Bill's does not have dental records, that their own DNA, the family's DNA, could help us identify their missing loved ones. And that's some of what was used to identify both Jimmy and Bill. I've interviewed dozens and dozens of family members of long-term missing persons. They are some of the saddest people that you could talk to. They live in a cruel limbo where they don't know what to think about with their missing loved one. You could see they are just so desperate for any answer, even an exclusion, even to learn that their loved one was not killed by this evil man, that they could finally cross that off their list.
There are more victims, but not victims who were killed at Gacy's hands. The victims that are out there are the families of police officers who suffered because when they were involved in a case, the families of the victims, the relatives of the victims, all the personnel, the lawyers involved in a case. Everybody's lives changed. Sometimes for the better, usually for the worse. There were a lot of tragedies that went on. People don't see that. They don't see all the fallout from cases like Gacy.
Hopefully, the public hears our message and they continue to come forward, and I'm able to continue to do this investigation, and in the end, hopefully all of them are identified, but it's going to be difficult.
Way overdue process that has to be shortened.
Many family members were angry that they were not allowed to actually witness the execution. My colleague Chuck Gowdy spent the night covering Gacy's execution that was scheduled actually for 1 minute after midnight, but occurred much later than that, about an hour later than that, because of at least one serious delay.
John Wayne Gacy was pronounced dead at 12:58 a.m.
That statement early this morning was more than 15 years in the making. 15 years after a graveyard of torture victims was found under his house, John Gacy paid the price. Gacy was executed for 33 sex-related murders, executed in this room at Stateville Prison, the former home of the old electric chair. His death by lethal injection took 18 minutes, 3 or 4 times longer than it should have, because of a major snafu, a blockage in an intravenous line that was to deliver the chemical to stop Gacy's breathing, the second of 3 chemicals.
During the second chemical, there was some problem with that chemical gelling in the line. We're not real clear whether it was the blood clotting with the needle or whether the chemical itself was gelling.
42 official and media witnesses watched the execution and watched as the curtain was closed during the foul-up.
He did not make eye contact with any of us. He looked up at the ceiling, said a few words to the director and the warden. One of the things I did notice was there was a complete change in the color of his face, and obviously he had a stoppage of the heart.
There were all these sort of shadowy things going on, and it was very creepy, but it wasn't like you saw anything bad happen.
Authorities say Gacy made a final statement that taking his life would not compensate for the loss of others, and that this was the state murdering him. 23 relatives of Gacy victims were not among the witnesses. They were put in a meeting room at the prison, found out Gacy was dead from TV news coverage, and served punch and cookies.
We weren't at all notified what was going on throughout the whole episode, and we were all a little bit distraught about that.
The cause of death to be listed on John Wayne Gacy's death certificate, homicide. Ironically, the same cause of death listed on the death certificates of his 33 victims. Albeit in Gacy's case, it was at the hands of the state. At Stateville Prison in Joliet, Chuck Gowdy, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
Now, as Chuck mentioned, relatives of the victims flocked here for the execution, for the final chapter of their suffering, if you will. And following the execution, they reflected on all the years and all the pain.
I just don't feel that it solved a whole lot, seeing someone, hearing about someone's death. But it was the sentence that came down. And I feel we need to be more consistent with our laws if we expect to ever have a peaceful society.
My son should be remembered, and all those that have not been mentioned should be mentioned. And Michael Marino should be mentioned, and all those that have never been mentioned should be mentioned. Thank you, God.
I feel justice has been served. Just like Tim said, I'm glad it's over. It was a long, drawn-out, way overdue process that has to be shortened.
Were you told about what his last statement was? What was your opinion about that?
We were told nothing. We were really told very little.
His last statement was that he felt he was innocent, he was a victim of all this?
You know, that's something he's been saying for 15 years. That's basically what I expected him to say.
That gentleman, Vito Mazzaro, the brother of a victim, appealed to the governor late yesterday afternoon so that he could witness the execution. The governor would not speak to him on the phone, and aides said he would not be allowed. He would have to stay with the other victims' families and relatives in another room. We'll have more in about 30 minutes. Live from Stateville Prison in Joliet, I'm Dick Johnson, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.